Thanks, Chick. So this is Bo, and I'm going to start, and I'll go over what we're going to do today, which is really give some context and just overall frames about how we see the issue. And I'm not sure if everybody's following along, but we're using the PowerPoint, so if it helps you, you can click on that and follow along. And then, so I'll do the context, and then Gajwa is going to talk about the organizing that's happened and how we came to terminology and analysis. And then Chai will talk about practices that best serve victims and survivors. And then we are hoping that there will be enough time at the end where we can take some questions and have discussion on the issue. So get started. So when we did this work, I just want to say that I think that there's a perception perhaps put out there that the Hmong community or Hmong women don't talk about these issues. And I want to say that that's absolutely not true. I've been in the community obviously all my life, but also having been a person that has cared deeply about women and girls issues and really started my career working in the field of domestic violence, that it has really been the community that has come forth, and more specifically survivors and victims that have sought help, that has prompted the community to, in particular, the community of Hmong women to do something about it. And as early as 1979, the first Hmong women's organizations were created specifically to address women's issues. And so, you know, people often wonder if Hmong women know what they want from this. And from my many years of doing work with the community, I would say that absolutely Hmong women are demanding for change, and to not just talk about us as Hmong American women, but to connect across the globe and to say that we want more gender equity for Hmong women across the globe. And this slide is really a personal picture. It's from a trip to Thailand where a mother is sewing while her baby girl is sleeping, but the person on the right is my daughter. And, you know, in discussions, ultimately, we all want the same thing for our girls, and that's really for them to grow up healthy, happy, and to be valued in society so that they can achieve their full potential. So our work is really about looking at this deeply and to talk about what kind of world we all are a part of so that we can work on the tough issues. I think, can someone put their unmute? Sorry, I'm just hearing feedback, so I get tripped up myself. So with that as context for our work, I want to say that, you know, oftentimes what we have heard and through our own lived experiences, many of the women that we organize with across the globe are not just advocates and community builders, but many of them are, and us, are also survivors. And so what we talked about in this organizing work is really understanding that Hmong women don't live one-dimensional lives, right? That there are intersecting power systems that have to do with patriarchy that causes misogyny and, you know, the kinds of practices that are harmful to women and girls. That as an ethnic group that has experienced much atrocity throughout history for many centuries, race is a very important aspect of how Hmong women experience both service and care. And then also that as the world thinks about making money work, that becomes also a driver, and in particular, in this case, understanding also our newfound privileges of being American citizens and the value of American dollar as compared to other kinds of currency across the world. And then ultimately globalization and the opportunity for people to go where they want and things like that. So all these are issues that or are power systems that Hmong women understand deeply and live every day in the context of, and they undergird kind of the work that we have been doing. So all to say that Hmong women also are talking about not just disrupting behaviors that cause harm and abuse to women, but we think of our work really in terms of movement building, and that's really how do we challenge and intentionally disrupt the practices that are harmful, but ultimately how we need to be able to come together and talk about what is the new thing that we're trying to build. And oftentimes we have heard in these conversations where people are trying to be helpful and supportive of us, and often telling us that if Hmong women could just learn the rules or the laws that whether that be the Hmong community itself or different systems in which we live, including, the American system, that we would be able to achieve some liberation and equity. And we always say, what we're talking about is actually trying to build a world where there is gender equity, and it's about movement building and not just purely representational in terms of getting to the same place. And so that kind of world, we know that women all over the world don't have that yet, and that's what our work is trying to focus on. So for us, that really means what are the practices that we try to build across our network of leaders and organizers. And we talk about the deep change, and that means change in culture. We're not just talking about the Hmong culture, but also, the cultures in which Hmong women live, because each country is different. And so they have then their own kind of culture. And then, how do we also spend time to craft solutions that are about creating, shifting, and dismantling power systems that are abusive and cause harm to women and girls. And then also elevating that Hmong women are not just the victims in these situations, but that we have leadership. And we have been thinking about this for a long time and have ideas for what could change and how it is that we could build with the rest of the world to achieve gender equity. And then most importantly, it's really about building, for us, about building connections and what we call sisterhood across the globe, because we know that in one country, if we just mitigate the issue in the U.S., then what we have seen is that the message or what is talked about in terms of Hmong women is carried by men to other countries, and that is not what we want to happen. Women need to be talking to women, so building that thread is also very important. And so we spend a lot of time cultivating that, and that is why our movement is global. So I'm going to turn it over to Kajwa, and she's going to talk about the organizing work and talk about definitions and things like that. Kajwa?
Thank you, Bo. This is Kajwa. I'm in Madison, and I've been in this field of work, for the last 20 years. I'm hoping that today we can share a little bit of our lessons learned and a little bit of our experience in working directly with Hmong women and girls on this issue and how we came about even giving this definition, how we came about like of the definition, the strategy, the building of sisterhood, this organizing model that was very specific to those of us who were helping Hmong women and girls on the ground in Wisconsin, but has evolved and become a global movement. So a little bit about the work. In the state of Wisconsin, it's quite unlike other states. We are funded throughout the state to provide domestic violence and gender justice advocacy. So there's at any given time about 20 to 30 Hmong advocates throughout the state of Wisconsin that provides direct services and advocacy for Hmong victims and survivors. As we've been doing this work for a long time, in 2006, we had a unique opportunity from one of our project partners, which was a state coalition. They had a little bit of funding left over. They wanted to know what we wanted to have a conversation on and what we thought our needs were. Uniquely, during that same time, a lot of the women that we saw throughout the state that normally would come for just basic domestic violence, restraining order, how can you help me with this, child support, they were asking something different. They were saying, my husband has left the country and I haven't seen him for 2 weeks, or there's a lot of phone cards, international phone cards around the house, or it looks like he's sending money to somebody overseas. And I think that he's, married or engaged in a relationship overseas. So that was being reported throughout the state of Wisconsin. So we decided that in 2007 we would have a conversation. We were very intentional about who we would invite. We wanted to make sure that those who were most impacted were invited to the table. As you know, at that time, a lot of people who were experiencing this, there was a lot of shame in the community and nobody was talking about it. And so we were not able to even get Hmong victims and survivors to come and tell their stories at our first summit, our first gathering. We had to ask a young lady from California to come to be one of our face-to-face speakers. And so that just kind of tells you how much shame and how much silence there was in 2007. So as you can see, this issue has been ongoing for a long time, and we've been very aware of it. So we invited to the table victim voices, Hmong natural leaders, people who we thought that were healthy clan leaders, meaning that they had a reputation in the community of being fair and just, and people really respected them. So we invited them. We invited all the Hmong advocates throughout the state of Wisconsin, and at that time, even the Hmong advocates who were experiencing this issue did not say much about the issue. Why did we bring them together? We really knew that there was something happening in the community, but we weren't sure what it was yet, and so we decided to hold a summit. At that time, we started working with Bo, and we started working with Chick at the Institute. So as you can see, since 2007, from the first dialogue to the fourth dialogue, things had changed rapidly. So in 2007, we were trying to prevent what we thought was a trend. And we said, we have to address this. At that time, we didn't have terminology. We didn't have shared analysis. Everybody was talking about it in a different light. We had a lot of mainstream organizations and advocates wanting us to call it certain, wanting us to fit it into what had already been put out there. So a lot of people pushed back, saying this is trafficking, and at that moment we were not quick to call it that, because we knew that there was something different, and we knew that there was a cultural context to it that people didn't understand, that only Hmong advocates at that time really understood that if we mislabeled it, that we would miss an opportunity to engage our community in helping to create long-lasting solutions. And so the second summit, what between those 4 years, I wanted to tell you that from the first one of having to like bring somebody from California to talk about this issue to the last summit where we've had like victims and survivors, a lot of the advocates who didn't say anything about it, they were coming out with personal stories or they were directly impacted. And so we knew that it was no longer a trend, and in fact, even within 4 years, that it had also become a norm within the community. But from the beginning, we were very strategic about always centering the voices of victims and survivors. Our shared analysis that we came out of those summits, we came up with some shared analysis, and those were that we understand and support healthy family reunification. As refugees, we want our families to be together. We've been torn apart by war, and many have not seen their relatives for a long time. So we were looking at a solution that would not stop us from reunifying with our loved ones.
Pretty good. How are you?
The second, sorry, somebody's phone is, can somebody mute their phone? Okay, and then the second thing was that we understood that if we did not come up with solutions that address root causes, we would only be putting Band-Aids on this issue, and in fact it would just evolve as we create solutions to put remedies to this problem, that it would just eventually evolve. And so we knew to look at the root causes, which was patriarchy, misogyny, globalization, race, capitalism, globalization. And then the other thing that we were very clear about from the beginning.
Training in Prescott. You were super.
I'm sorry. Can somebody mute their line?
And she's going to take the training. Yes, yes.
All guests have been muted. You can unmute your line by pressing *6.
Hello?
Nancy,
am I on?
Okay. Yeah, you're on.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So this is what technology looks like. From the beginning, we knew that we could not do this work without centering the voices of those most impacted. So from the beginning, we always invited our mothers and our sisters and our aunties who are directly impacted by this. By now, at the end of 4 years of gathering, we also knew that a lot of the advocates who were advocating were also directly impacted. And so always we brought those voices to the table. The other thing that we really thought about was that we needed to create new leadership, and that would be the only the other opportunity for us to like really uplift and build Hmong sisterhood and new Hmong women leaders. And we wanted the solution to this issue to come from the community, because we believe that the solution already lies within the community. The other thing is that we were really focused on the fact that we did not want to increase criminalization of our communities, and so that's why some of the solutions that you're going to see in the now really reflects that. And that the other thing that we had thought about was that throughout these years, what had happened was it seemed like there was a breakdown, and the leadership was no longer leading, and there was no source of accountability for victims, or no place for victims to really go to get any kind of help anymore. And so we also thought about, like, we had to come up with some new social norms or new moral compass for our community if in fact we needed to. The definition of, so as you can see, the definitions, the analysis, the terminology, all of this did not come out of one or two people. It came out of hundreds of advocates who really from throughout the state of Wisconsin and then later throughout the U.S., we all came together and said, this is what we're going to define it, and this is the reason why. It wasn't an overnight thing, and it had a lot of influence from people who were directly impacted. The definitions of abusive international marriage is that it can encompass all of these things. It could be somebody who is marrying an underage child or teen. It can be someone, we said that it's also abusive if there's a huge age gap because it's creating and changing the community and the makeup of our community. And it also impacts when someone who's 60 marries someone who's 20, there's an impact there because it leaves behind lots of issues, as you all can see. The other thing is that there was a lot of like forced legal divorces and forced marriages. And so the legal divorces, like they would actually ask their first wives to divorce them here legally, but they would still be culturally married. And then there's another term that was out there that had already been circulating around some of our other women of color communities, such as the South Asian community, the marry and dump. So it was basically they would go there and they would marry them, pay the dowry, and then sleep with them for about a month and be with them while they were over there, and then they would have no intentions of bringing them over, the new bride. And so as you can see, that some of it, a lot of it was driven by poverty. We spoke to one of the Hmong women leaders who is head of the Hmong women's organization in Laos called Vinyo Laos. And she said, you know, if you want to know why this is happening, if you want to know why the girls in Laos are doing this, all you have to do is follow them to their village and you'll understand. Extreme poverty. And so people started seeing this as a way out. What the impact in the community was devastating because, as you can see, there was an increase in sexual violence, increase in child sexual exploitation overseas, child abandonment of both the children here, of the first wives, and if they went overseas and had children over there, there was child abandonment on both sides of the world. Extreme poverty and exploitation. So if money is being sent to the second wife in Laos, that would leave the first family here devastated also and contributed to an increase in poverty in children. And abusive international marriage, after those years of us working, no longer was seen as a trend. It became a normal practice where people were no longer ashamed. So you would have like high-level official or you know, respectable, what you would think respectable clan leaders who would also be engaged in this. And I'm not saying that everybody was engaged in this, but the fact that it became a norm made it acceptable, and then it became something that people just did, and without being held accountable. Of course, there was a lot of human rights violation, especially those who are underage, and especially when there's force and sexual violence. But what we knew to be true was that we had to come up with solutions that really involved those most impacted. And we also knew that we needed to create terminology that our community could accept. And we needed to come up with a culturally specific analysis. And that analysis was that we could not, like many of our mainstream allies wanted us to label it trafficking. We could not label it trafficking because there were so many things that was not, it didn't fit into the trafficking terminology. Nor the other thing that we knew to be true was labeling in Hmong community is very important. So if people start to see you as a victim that's trafficked for sex, that's very different than someone seeing you as a child who, even if you're young, as somebody who came over as a wife. And so those two basic terminology really defines who a Hmong woman is and actually has very different consequences. And so we knew that to be true. And we also knew that if we talked about it in a way that our community could not understand, so if we said you came here, you're a trafficked victim, you know, these are the remedies that we need to help you, if they do not see themselves as a trafficked victim and they see themselves as a family member or a wife, then they would no longer seek services from us because it was not fitting what they thought they were. And the other thing is we as advocates could not label them what they did not want to be labeled as. So then we started to look at some of the other solutions. We really thought about community accountability. Like, how do we hold a community to better standards? How do we start to shift the narrative around that? But also, we as advocates and as those who came to these summits decided that we would no longer stand silently, and we would start calling it out for what it is. So, for examples, we would go to funerals or family gatherings, and if we saw photos circulating or phone numbers circulating of those from overseas, we would say something to our family members, and we would say that's inappropriate. So we actually took accountability about what we would do. And then we also, part of lifting up Hmong women's narratives and Hmong women's leadership was about dismantling patriarchy. We wanted to value Hmong women and girls. And at the center of all of our fight, it was about gender equity, and it was we centered that in all of our strategies, along with centering those voices of those most impacted. So what Chick mentioned before at the beginning, throughout this whole process, what we knew to be true was that we needed to document this. So even from 2007, I was very I was very direct about how we would move forward, and one of those things was we need to document what we're doing, because if we don't tell our story, somebody else will, and they probably won't tell it the way that we would. And so we've been working with Chick and API-GBV, Gender. I don't know their new name now, but API-GBV Institute at that time for a long time, and we came up with this document that really talked about all of our gatherings. The sad part was that we did not, in 2012, we could not even put that out because we felt that the community was not ready. And so we kept that report to ourselves, but eventually we started saying, let's put it out in the community. I think people are going to it's going to resonate with people. People may be ready to talk. So we started doing presentations at Hmong conferences, and then we got really well. It was very well received. In 2013, we decided that we would put it out virtually. October 1st, I was just like, okay, let's just put it out, see if people will come and people want to have a conversation. Literally within an hour, there was response from throughout the U.S. About this, and people really wanted to talk about it, and people wanted to know if there was an actual gathering in their cities. And so that's when Building Our Future was launched. We decided that our community was ready, and that they were ready to engage in this conversation, and that we were ready as advocates. So Building Our Future really comes from the fact that we understood that this is our problem, but that the solutions lie within the community, and that it's going to take all of us, and that it has to be organized grassroots by those most impacted, and that we were taking ownership for creating our own destiny, and that we were doing it through the leadership of Hmong women. So that's just gives you a little backdrop about how we came to these analysis and this movement, that it wasn't an overnight thing, and it wasn't that, Hmong women and advocates have not been working on this issue. In fact, we put a lot of time and effort into this issue. And one of the reasons why we had also been so silent for a couple of years was because there was so much there are so many advocates that also feared for their own lives, because it was not something that we knew that it was an issue that if we did not do it the right way, that there would be a lot of backlash, not only for us as Hmong women advocates, but for the people that we serve. And so the next Chai is going to really talk about what we've been doing and what's been working in some of those strategies. Chai?
Chai, I think you have to press *6.
I forgot to unmute myself. Hi, everyone. This is Chai, and here in Wisconsin, I actually hold two different roles. A lot of what I'm going to be presenting on is kind of stuff that I've been gathering from other advocates in Wisconsin and from personal experience serving victims and survivors. My two roles: one, I am the advocate outreach specialist for the Hmong, Wisconsin Family Strengthening Helpline, which is a 24-hour helpline that is staffed by Hmong bilingual advocates 24 hours a day. And I believe we are the only helpline in the nation right now that is staffed by a Hmong speaking person 24 hours a day. So with that role, I reach out to all the Hmong advocates in Wisconsin and kind of keep us together, be the resource and kind of the go-to person for all advocates. Besides that, I am a domestic violence advocate, and I work in a mainstream white organization. So my program is a culturally specific program inside a white shelter. So let me just go to the right place. So when we started talking about abusive international marriages, we had to think about who were the folks that were most impacted. We obviously knew that there would be the wife here in the United States and the young girls or the girlfriend or the wife that he was engaging in a relationship with overseas. Then we also started hearing children come out and really talk about how they were being impacted. So we were seeing that with the abusive international marriage, unlike what we were seeing before, we were seeing one perpetrator and so many victims that came out of just one person's actions. We were seeing children here in the United States who were being neglected or were witnessing violence or even experiencing violence. We were seeing first wives here in the United States who were also coming to us for services. Second wives, we started seeing as we started servicing victims. Also, then there was the elders who were relying on adults to take care of them. So many times, if their children were engaged in these relationships, they also suffered with the family as well. And we considered them to be victims as well. We also saw that the community, because this issue had impacted everybody, pretty much everyone in the community had been personally impacted by it directly or indirectly, either through their spouse or a family member who were engaging in these relationships. And it was really hard for us to talk about this because even like Kajwa mentioned before, even some of us as advocates, we were impacted by abusive international marriages. And then as Hmong advocates, and some of us here in Wisconsin, being the only advocate at an organization or in the city, sometimes we found ourselves being one advocate and serving all these victims, victims who had a shared perpetrator. So then we also started looking at different ways that what abusive international marriage looked like. Did it look like the typical clients that we were seeing before who were experiencing domestic violence? And although there were so many similarities, we also saw that it was different, and we had to understand how different it was so that we could start serving the community. And before I go into the different forms, I just wanted to kind of share a story about what actually happened here at the shelter that I worked at, which, again, like I mentioned, is a mainstream white organization. That most of our clients who come through shelter are white. But when we had a Hmong client come through and started talking about her experiences with abusive international marriage, and this is like before we even started training our advocates here about what abusive international marriage was, it was hard for them to see where the violence was and how safety was a concern to her and how fit she would be for shelter. So then we had to really look at how different it was and the differences. one form of abuse that we hear a lot about with abusive international marriages advocates who work every day with with women is economic abuse. Their partners were sending money overseas and not contributing to their households. Many times, what used to be a dual income household started becoming a single income household. Their partners were cashing out assets such as, borrowing from their life insurances or secretly taking money from their 401ks. Many of the clients we've seen, too, have been paying on their homes for many years, and some had even been close to or done paying for their homes, and they were experiencing seeing their partners going out, refinancing their homes for money to engage in these relationships. Lots of money used on phone cards, money being put aside and withheld from the family to save up for these international trips. Then we saw the physical abuse. Physical abuse increased with abusive international marriage when their partners started engaging in these relationships. And the physical abuse would be experienced by both the first, second wife, and even the children. Isolation. We saw isolation a lot especially with the new wives when they were coming into the country. They were coming into a country where they didn't have any relatives, or if they did have relatives, they were distant relatives, and they lived far away. Many times these new wives would come, and the husbands would keep them isolated as kind of a security for him, that she wouldn't leave him because she didn't have nowhere to go or didn't know where to go. So they weren't being allowed to go out to access education, to get jobs, to even communicate with other Hmong women in the house. And then oftentimes their only window to the outdoor world would be his children here and the first wife here and him. We also saw an increase in sexual violence. And sexual violence has always existed, but it never really been talked about as much until women started coming to us and talking about sexual acts that their husbands were asking them to perform and they weren't comfortable with. But they never necessarily labeled it as sexual assault or sexual violence or rape, because they always thought that was kind of their duty as the wife to perform those acts. So they knew it was wrong, but without labeling it that way, it was hard for mainstream programs or programs who didn't have culturally specific programs to see that she was actually really talking about sexual violence, and what she was talking about wasn't just another sexual act. The second wife was most of the time underage, so sexual violence occurs right away when he's engaging in or having sexual contact with her. We see a lot of rape of the first wife to reaffirm his manhood, rape of the second wife to reaffirm his manhood. He would be temporary paying wives, easy, no-contest sexual relationships, exploitation of children, girls, teens, women. There's the marry and dump, telling someone that you're marrying them, and it's mostly just for the sex, and then not having any intentions of going back or making this person your wife. So it really, in a way, is just another way to solicitate sex in a different country with money. And an increase in STDs. Women were coming to us with STDs. They've never heard of this before. Many times they were being blamed by their husbands for the STDs. We were also seeing fraud. This was also new to us. And the families, women were coming to us because they were worried. Their sons were being forced into fake marriages so that their sons can bring over their husband's new wives. They were being forced to legally divorce him and tell the court system that they're divorced and can no longer live together, but still being culturally married to him. And then also men who were engaged in these relationships were changing ages of the victims overseas. So when she's coming to the United States, she would be on papers 18, but in reality she was 15. We saw increase in neglect of the children here in the United States. Children's basic needs weren't being met, neglect especially with incomes in the household changing. When he started withdrawing all his income, we saw neglect of even children in the homeland, children of that second wife. If she was to get impregnated and he left and she's there alone, and she doesn't have any systems there to help her collect any child support or so on. And then we saw that families were breaking apart. They were no longer building bonds, and that was both here and overseas. The women we saw, and it was hard for, and I can, even here at our organization, it was hard for them, other advocates, to see why she had to navigate so many systems and why she had to make decisions that she had to make. Well, Hmong women have to navigate so many systems. One is the clan system, and within the Hmong clan system itself, it's not just one clan that she goes to. It's still she has to work with her clan, his clan, and then the response that she gets from the Hmong community. While she's doing that, she may be in contact with the American legal system, so court, law enforcement, child support. Then Hmong women are still accessing their mainstream support services. Some may be involved with programs over at like Health and Human Services, the schools, making sure the kids are okay, and other community programs. Then there's immigration, and within immigration, maybe her own immigration status, and then also contacting like the U.S. Embassy to prevent her husband from going overseas or to find solutions that way. Another system that she navigates is her family. Because he's neglected the family, she becomes that person that really holds up the family, so her children becomes part of a lot of the decisions that she makes. And then, of course, Hmong support services. So even within Hmong support services, going to the local Hmong associations for help, interpreting services, and then local domestic violence services. And it was important for advocates to see the different systems that she was working with. Otherwise, when Hmong women would be going through one system to another, we started, mainstream programs started seeing her as a service hopper, going from one place to another to get services and not knowing which way she is, but she was going. But it was important for her to take these steps to make sure that she was leaving, or that to make sure her family was safe and her family would still keep as much of their living, the way of life as steady as possible. Some of the advocacy and support services that we've seen that have changed when working with victims of who had partners engaging in these abusive international marriages, where we started getting a lot of requests to write letters to the embassies. And so really going over with the clients what a letter to the embassy would be. Restraining orders. Like I said again, when women were talking about this, you had to really talk to them and help them frame their stories, or to help draw out important points for them to be able to get a restraining order. Otherwise, many times it was looked upon as just another having an affair or other and restraining orders weren't being granted because there was really no understanding of why she needed that restraining order. Child support, helping women be able to get some financial assistance from him while he was sending all his income overseas. Immigration, again, with the new brides coming over, sometimes her immigration papers were being taken away, or he had never filed for a green card, or when she finally left, she left without any of that. And helping her look at the process of gaining all of that back, we started to see immigration issues that we've never seen in the past with Hmong people coming into the United States as refugees. We really never had to worry or look at the different types of visa that were out there to protect victims of crime here in the United States. So that was something that was very new to us, and we started having to take a look at.